portion. Okay. The hierarchy means there is a top dog, followed by a second one, third, and so on. The action and the control and regulation of this hormone production has a hierarchy to it. And earlier in the lecture, I mentioned we have the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the structure that connects between the nervous system and the endocrine system. It has both functions, neuronal function and endocrine function. Okay? So the first level of the hierarchy is the hypothalamus. It sits at the floor of the third ventricle in the diencephalon and serves as the neuroendocrine interface. It receives inputs from the nervous system: stress signals, pain, circadian rhythms, temperature, emotional state. All these are inputs coming to the hypothalamus to inform its output. And the output is, it has two forms of output. It's a neuronal output and endocrine output. Okay, the input is from the nervous system, either from sensory input or some environmental information coming through the different senses that the nervous system utilizes. Something you smell, you see, you hear, things like that. So the connection between the endocrine system, I want people to understand that. The connection between the endocrine system and the outside world is done through the nervous system. The endocrine system doesn't have a direct way of understanding what is happening around the organism in the external environment. It has a lot of ways to understand the internal environment, the internal milieu. Okay, it has sensory receptors and other things that can tell the endocrine system what's going on. It can sense levels, it can sense things like that from the internal milieu. And as I mentioned, the endocrine system plays a big part in controlling the homeostatic state of the organism. But any external information should come through the nervous system. And this is relayed and linked through the hypothalamus. So this hypothalamus gets all kinds of information coming to it from different parts of the nervous system. It tells it if there is a danger. It tells it if there is any form of stress. It tells it if there is some emotional state that needs attention. If there is any, even the logical part of the brain has some pathways that go to the hypothalamus. Okay, and this is the connection between the nervous system, the psychological states, the different things that happen in the nervous system and your mind, and the endocrine system. The hypothalamus basically converts the neural inputs into hormonal outputs. It releases small amounts of releasing hormones like TRH, CRH, GnRH directly into specialized portal blood vessels. And please make a note of this. This is very important for the exam. This portal blood flow, which is called the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system, it's a venous system that bypasses the, when we say portal, means it's a door that bypasses the arterial system and connects two areas without going back to the heart. The systemic circulation, the way it works is all the venous return will go to the heart and then distributed through the arterial system to the rest of the body. This is the systemic big circulation. We have areas in the body that directly convey venous blood between organs. For example, the portal system in the gut, in the viscera, that connects the visceral circulation, the venous return from the viscera to the liver. It doesn't go through the heart to be redistributed. No, we want everything that's absorbed through the gut to go to the liver first, to be handled, to be processed before it joins the circulation. The same way here. This is called the hypothalamo-hypophyseal. Hypophyseal means pituitary related portal system. It goes between the hypothalamus and the pituitary. With all the secretions that come from the hypothalamus going directly into that. Okay. Now, delivers them at very high concentrations to the pituitary, just a few millimeters away from it. Understand that. This is very important high yield point in the USMLE exams. Now, we know level 1. Let's see level 2. Level 2 is the anterior pituitary. The pituitary gland is the master gland. We have two levels, or we have two parts. We have anterior pituitary. It receives these hypothalamic signals and amplifies them. A tiny amount of CRH becomes a much larger amount of ACTH. A tiny amount of TRH becomes a substantial amount of TSH. TRH is thyroid releasing hormone, okay? Its function is to stimulate the pituitary gland, anterior pituitary gland, to release TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. So very small amount of TRH can lead to the secretion of a large amount of TSH, and TSH in it goes to stimulate the thyroid gland to produce thyroxine. And these are called tropic hormones. When a hormone goes to stimulate another gland rather than a target tissue, it's called tropic. In this case, I would say TRH is a tropic hormone. TSH is a tropic hormone because TSH doesn't function by itself. It goes and stimulates the thyroid gland. So it's called tropic hormone. Okay? So the pituitary releases these tropic hormones, TSH, ACTH, LH, FSH, growth hormone, and prolactin. Growth hormone, in a way, is a tropic hormone as well because it doesn't work directly. It works through releasing growth factors. This is for another day, but it leads to the release of these hormones from the anterior pituitary into the circulation. Now it's in the circulation. It's not through this portal system. The portal system is just between the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and it's very short, by the way. They are very close to each other, the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and it directly transmits or takes these hormones from the hypothalamus to the pituitary, and then the pituitary releases its tropic hormones that travel through the blood. Where to go to? Target glands. That's why we call them tropic. Okay. Now the third level is a peripheral gland. We have thyroid gland, adrenal gland, we have gonads, we have other glands. We call them peripheral. They receive the tropic hormones and produce effector hormones, thyroxine from the thyroid, cortisol and aldosterone from the adrenal cortex, estradiol from the ovaries, testosterone from the testes. These are the hormones that actually produce the tissue changes we recognize clinically. Okay? So the hypothalamus has its own connection with the anterior pituitary. Okay? And it's through the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system, and the hormones coming out of the hypothalamus goes to the pituitary. The pituitary is the master gland in the sense that it controls most of the peripheral glands, not all of them, but most. Okay, and then the peripheral glands, after they are stimulated by the hormones, tropic hormones coming from the pituitary, they release their hormones to function or to affect their target tissues. And as we said, the target tissue should have a receptor. Okay? Should have a receptor to respond to that hormone. You have to have the correct receptor to respond to that specific hormone. Remember, all these hormones are carried at the same time through the blood. So the choice of which tissue to be affected by which hormone depends on whether that tissue has the correct receptor. People need to understand every nucleated cell in the body expresses at least one hormone receptor. Understand that, okay? And the different types of tissues exist because the gene expression is different between tissues, okay? Cardiac tissue is different from skin tissue because the gene expression in both tissues is different, Okay, the types of genes and proteins synthesized and other biochemical processes is different. Okay, that's why they are different tissues, and hence they have different receptors to respond to different hormones. And it's this receptor expression is not uniform. It varies by cell type, developmental stage, and physiological state. Okay, now we move to a very important aspect. And this is just the diagram showing the hierarchy again. Now, there is a very important biological mechanism that people need to understand when studying endocrinology. And that is the feedback mechanisms. Okay, we need to control and regulate the release of hormones. It cannot be a haphazard process. It cannot be an ongoing process. It has to be regulated. And this regulatory process depends on something called negative feedback. Any system to function properly has to have feedback loops. Endocrine system is not an exception. But the main or the master regulator in the endocrine functioning is a negative feedback. Okay? Let me explain what a negative feedback is. We have this, as you can see in the diagram, we have this circular feedback loop diagram. Okay? The hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary to the thyroid gland, and eventually the hormone increases. We start with TRH, thyroid releasing hormone, then TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary, then goes to the thyroid gland, which releases T3 and T4. But is this process going to go forever? No. The rising level of T3 and T4 actually loops back to talk to the hypothalamus and to the pituitary, telling them that we have enough, we need to stop or suppress the release of this hormone. Okay? So suppression of the hypothalamus and pituitary is done through the rising T3 and T4. So when this suppression or this negative feedback goes to the hypothalamus, we call it long loop. When it goes to the pituitary, we call it short loop. So why is that important clinically? The importance of this comes from the fact that you cannot allow the process of releasing hormones to go forever. And these negative feedback loops are the single most important concept in all of endocrinology. Okay? So let's walk through it step by step. The hypothalamus detects that metabolic rate or the thyroid hormones levels are low. So either we have a change in the physiological state saying the metabolic rate is low, or the thyroid hormone level itself is low. It releases TRH, that's thyrotropin releasing hormone, into the portal circulation. And from there, it reaches the anterior pituitary. This thyrotropin releasing hormone reaches the anterior pituitary and stimulates the thyrotrope cells to release TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, into the systemic circulation, into the blood. Okay? Then the TSH is carried through the blood to the thyroid gland and stimulates synthesis and release of T4 and T3 into the bloodstream. This process goes for some time until we have enough level or increased levels of T3 and T4, and they go up and they loop back to the pituitary, to the hypothalamus and to the pituitary, telling them we have enough. And this will suppress the release of TRH and TSH. And once this is suppressed, the output from the thyroid gland will also drop. This is called negative feedback. It's self-correcting by design. Okay? Now, understand, long loop means to the hypothalamus, short loop means to the pituitary. They happen together simultaneously. Okay, I gave the examples through the thyroid gland because it's kind of the easiest of them. But we have multiple axes that work the same way. We have the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. We call it HPT, or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis or hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. All these are axes work the same way. Okay. Now, the importance of knowing these processes comes when you are interpreting levels of hormones. In clinical practice, we are able to detect or check the level of TSH and thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, whether free or total. If you have TSH level but low thyroid hormone levels, this means what? The thyroid gland is unable to respond to these screams from the pituitary through elevating the TSH level to produce more thyroxine. It's unable to respond. This means the problem is in the thyroid gland, okay? It's a hypothyroidism that's primary. When we say primary hypothyroidism, means the gland itself, the peripheral gland is diseased, unable to produce enough thyroxine. If we have high thyroid hormones and low TSH, this means the thyroid gland is producing too much thyroid hormone that went and suppressed the TSH excessively. Again, it's a primary problem with the thyroid gland, but in this case, it's excessive production. That's how we look at these results and interpret them. And we'll come to talk about that in future videos. For now, I just want you to understand this negative feedback loop is very important. Without TSH, by the way, the thyroid is not driven. If there is no TSH, the thyroid will not function. Okay? And we give the term primary failure, secondary failure, or tertiary failure, depending on which level is affected. If it's the peripheral gland, it's a primary failure. If it's the pituitary gland, it's usually a secondary failure. And tertiary failure either is the hypothalamus or some other form, as we will know. Now, since we have a negative feedback, this means we have positive feedback, right? That's the exception, though. In endocrinology, the more likely to be used to regulate hormone production is the negative feedback. But there are a few exceptions that use positive feedback. Like what? For example, rising estradiol curve that triggers an LH spike, the classic menstrual cycle graph. Okay, this is very important. Usually, positive feedback is utilized when you want to have a specific action. For example, ovulation. Ovulation is a very specific peak activity of the follicle, ovarian follicle. Okay, to achieve this peak activity, you need positive feedback, meaning propagation of the hormone level. So positive feedback is utilized in these circumstances. One of them is the ovulation. Classic example, LH surge is one of these examples. Throughout the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle, estradiol rises steadily, okay? At low levels, estradiol exerts the expected negative feedback. It suppresses LH. But as it crosses a critical threshold in the late follicular phase, the relationship inverts. Instead of suppressing or negatively feedback the LH, high estradiol now amplifies the LH release rather than suppressing it, and this LH surges and causes ovulation or triggers ovulation. This is a single, unique event in time. Once ovulation happens, the loop terminates. Okay? And this event, the ovulatory event, which is the follicle, the ovarian follicle ruptures, releases the ovum, it kind of leads to a drop in estradiol or estrogen. And the stimulus, which is positively feedback, meaning high estradiol causes LH surge, but after the surge, ovulation happens and everything goes back to its classic negative feedback control or regulation. The system fires once, accomplishes its purpose, and self-terminates. Okay? This same pattern can occur during labor, meaning uterine contractions stimulate oxytocin release. Oxytocin intensifies contractions. Stronger contractions cause or derive more oxytocin. This escalating loop continues until delivery, and then it terminates itself after achieving the purpose, which is delivery. Okay, so these two positive feedback loops needs to be well understood, and understand that it has a purpose, specific purpose. Once that purpose achieved, ovulation or labor, then they will self-terminate. Okay, as I mentioned, the relationship between the pituitary, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the peripheral glands is expressed in the form of axes. Okay, we have what is called the HPT, which is the hypothalamus TRH, the thyroid axis, hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis, or hypothalamus adrenal axis, or hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis. It's an organizational backbone of you see it frequently in endocrinology. I don't think we need to spend a long time here. Now, after knowing all these key points about endocrinology, we need to kind of understand what's the purpose from having this system. What is it? Okay, there is a purpose. Any system, whether it's an inanimate system or a biological system, has a purpose. Okay, so what the endocrine system governs? It governs these major survival mechanisms. Okay, the major physiological territories that the endocrine system governs are homeostasis. And homeostasis is the processes that are involved in keeping the internal milieu of the body stable in terms of a number of variables: blood glucose, blood pressure, blood sugar, then the temperature. All these are variables that are controlled within a certain range to achieve homeostasis. Endocrine or endocrinology or endocrine system is responsible from a big part of these homeostatic mechanisms. Okay? Then metabolism. Metabolism is the balance between anabolism and catabolism, meaning are you building things or breaking things? Okay? It's all about energy handling and building structures and so on. So these biochemical processes that are involved with energy mobilization, energy production, and storage, and so on, is the metabolic processes or metabolism. Some hormones are heavily involved in these metabolic processes, and one of them is insulin. The others are glucagon, cortisol, and so on. A thyroid hormone. All these are involved. We will be talking about this in more length. Each of these processes that are governed by the endocrine system will be talked about in a separate video. Okay. Then growth. Growth and development. You grow because of the effects of thyroid, of hormones, and you develop into a different, more established and more developed organism because of hormones. You transition between childhood to puberty to adulthood through the effects of these hormones. The other part about this endocrine system, it governs reproduction, and this is one of the essential biological processes for any organism. Stress adaptation is a more accurate form. And then we have electrolyte and water regulation, ADH, aldosterone, PTH, which is meant to control calcium levels, and so on. These are also heavily affected by the endocrine system. Now, as I mentioned, you can divide these pathological processes into primary, secondary, or tertiary, depending on which level in the hierarchy is involved. Now, what can happen? What can go wrong with endocrine system? Endocrine failure. We call it endocrine failure modes. What can happen? You either have hyperperfusion, meaning excessive secretion or not enough secretion, or since the actions of hormones depends on receptors, you have resistance to the effects of that hormone resistance, like the most famous may be insulin resistance, and this is a topic that we need to really understand. Or you might have a problem with transport. We said some of the hormones require binding proteins and stuff to be transported through the blood. So this might be one of the problems that can happen. So these are the 4 failure modes that can impact the nervous system. The endocrine system. Now, I can give you examples. Primary hypothyroidism, okay? What happens is the thyroid, which is the peripheral gland, cannot or unable to produce enough thyroid hormones. And then the feedback loop will be trying to get more of the TRH and TSH to stimulate the gland, but the gland is unable to produce despite the adequate stimulation from the higher up glands. This is called primary hypothyroidism, and it's a hypoperfusion state. The opposite is Graves' disease, for example, which is excessive production of thyroid hormones leading to excessive suppression of TRH and TSH, and so on. So these are the different pathological processes that can actually affect the endocrine system. Now, the reasons that I'm doing these videos is to help USMLE students understand what's important about medicine, how medicine actually appears in actual life, and what are they going to see in the exam, okay? So the exam actually tests certain areas in endocrinology considered important. One of the things that are important to know is the receptor location predicts time course. The membrane receptor equals fast, short-acting, non-genomic effects. Peptide catecholamine hormones, these are the types that actually use surface receptors. Okay? Then nuclear receptors, which are intracellular receptors, cause slow, genomic, sustained effect, like steroids and thyroid hormone. Every hormone you encounter maps to one of these 2 categories. Either it's lipid-soluble or water-soluble. Not the chemical structure per se, but this behavior, this trait about it. Water or lipid solubility. So you will be tested heavily on that. This knowledge is very important, and the consequences of knowing this or being water soluble or lipid soluble, as I explained, are the important parts about this. Now, the other pearl or other information that needs to be known for the exams is the production of GnRH. GnRH, which is gonadotropin releasing hormone by the pituitary gland, by the hypothalamus, is secreted in pulses, not continuous. It's in pulses. And this pulsatile secretion is important for exerting its stimulatory effect on the pituitary. If you gave, and this is used in clinical settings, by the way, if you give GnRH continuously and you maintain the specific level constantly, this will suppress. It will continuous GnRH achieved with GnRH agonists like leuprolide. Paradoxically suppresses the axis by causing receptor downregulation. This is heavily tested in the exams, and I think it's important to be known for all steps 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so pulsatile release of GnRH is important for its stimulatory effect. If you want to suppress it, give it continuously. Binding proteins like thyroid binding proteins, thyroid binding globulin, cortisol binding globulin, sex hormone binding globulin, and so on, alter total hormone concentrations without changing the free active fraction. Pregnancy, estrogen therapy, hepatic disease, and nephrotic syndrome all alter the binding protein levels and therefore total hormone readings. Always base clinical decision on the free fraction of the hormone. This is very important. This is the active fraction, the free fraction. The fifth pearl, the logic of dynamic testing. If you suspect excess, order a suppression test. For example, dexamethasone for Cushing syndrome, oral glucose tolerance for acromegaly. On the other hand, if you are suspecting a deficiency, you order stimulation test. Cosintropin test or cosintropin stimulation test for adrenal insufficiency, for example. So the direction of the test always matches the direction of your clinical suspicion. Yeah. So these are just small things to remember about endocrinology. Now, just to make it simpler, let's think of the endocrine system as the federal government, okay? And the way it's an analogy that's a closing part. Think of it as a federal communication network. The hypothalamus is the national government, Washington, D.C. And it sets policy by releasing hormones in response to inputs from the nervous system, from circadian clocks, from metabolic sensors, and from emotional and physical state of the organism. So all these inputs comes to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus sets policy and releases its stimulatory hormones. It translates the state of the body into hormonal instructions. Then the pituitary is the regional government. It receives policy directives via the portal population and translates them into regional orders, the tropic hormones, broadcast into the systemic circulation at much larger amplitude than the hypothalamic input. Then the peripheral glands are the local departments. They receive their directives and produce the effector hormones that actually execute the work at the tissue level: thyroxine, cortisol, estradiol, testosterone, and so on. And the feedback system is the parliament. It continuously reviews the outcomes. Are hormone levels appropriate? Is the regulated variable at its set point? And adjusts policy to correct deviations, which is the negative feedback. It prevents overshoot. Then this is the system which is inherently self-correcting. So every endocrine disease is ultimately a failure of one of these four components, and the national government failing hypothalamic disease, the regional government failing pituitary disease, local government failing primary gland disease, and then the parliamentary review failing feedback disruption. That framework will guide every video that follows in this series. That's how we are going to think about the endocrine system. Now, I would like to tell people that I will continue doing these videos. I know this is kind of a long video, but it was necessary to explain the principles of endocrinology and the rules that govern how this system is regulated and how it regulates different domains that are necessary for survival of the organism. We see you in future videos. Thank you very much.